fallen gurus, spiritual materialism, and what's the other one? The perplexed seeker. The perplexed seeker. That's us. And one of the definitions of a guru is that you listen to them without any question. Otherwise, it's a violation of the whole trust between you and the guru. And I hope to dispel that idea completely today for those of you that think you might be able to find a teacher who can really help you. So just to tell you that the reason I'm starting with the guru, the fallen guru thing, because it portrays the eternal question of the play of light and dark, the thing we see now playing out, all over the world and in our country. And to understand that, in a sense, if you look at the mythology, which is not really mythology, of Star Wars, it's sort of the Luke Skywalker that is, against the Darth Vader. And at the background of Darth Vader, there's the Sith, this evil demon. And at the background of Luke Skywalker, there's Yoda, who's more like a spiritual, sort of elf-like character. So this is not mythology, this is the cosmology of how the world works, and that's what I'm going to try and show today, because there's other stuff going on behind the scenes. So if you go away with one message, is that there isn't anybody who can show you the way. There are just many, many teachers to follow, and you'll get the drift as we go. So what we're going to talk about first is a little bit about the fallen gurus, but I'm going to include all the archetypes of the same thing, whether it's a priest or a musician or a leader of a country or anybody who's supposed to be a saint or an incredible healer. They all seem to fall. A question of how much power you get and how high you're up on the scale of an energy vibration. Then we'll talk about spiritual materialism and contrast it with a spiritual narcissism, a little bit about culting and how it happens, and the dark side of conviction, belief, faith, and surrender. And then what are the warning signs to be careful of? It's very unlikely that anybody here would fall for a James Jones type of a cult. But it's amazing how so many people that are intelligent and wealthy fall for the guru cult, because we think they've got something that we can't get on our own. The causes of the fall, how to avoid them. And then lastly, I'm going to talk about the 4 archetypes of the shadow. There's the shadow side of the 4 archetypes that we've talked about before in relationship to the 4 directions, because it's kind of a nature-bound and intrinsically indigenous way of looking at things. So I'm coming not from a psychological perspective, so I make apologies to the psychologists in the audience who can correct me at the end of the talk. The thing is, we've talked about this before, that we're all given a destiny cup to fill. And to the extent that we fill our cup, we will have completed our karma. And to the extent that we don't, we have to keep coming back again and again. Some people, they've got bigger cups than other people, and the fallen gurus have obviously got a huge cup. They've got a lot of talents, and they can still fall, although they should not fall, because to those that are given much, much more is expected. So the fallen guru is kind of karmically liable for much heavier karma than maybe somebody with a smaller cup that screws up, But we all have different cups, and so it's always difficult for the people with a big cup to know what to do, because they seem to be multi-talented and they don't really know what their true destiny is. So this is at the heart of all human motivation, the search for the higher self, whether we know it or not. And this quote is important from the Upanishads: "May the hero awaken from forgetfulness and transcend all anxiety and sorrow." Well, the Buddha wanted to do that. That's what he came to do. But the Guru also tells you he can do that, and usually it's always a male. And he says that the only way you'll do this is through me. And that's kind of what we're going to be talking about. That's the dark side of the Guru. If you read the quote in the beginning, the light side of the Guru is the quote that the Maharaj says, that the Guru, the real Guru, doesn't talk like that. He's just a teacher. He doesn't have a special designation. So the Buddha did say, believe nothing unless it agrees with your reason. So unless it agrees with your intelligence, with your mind, if it's a duck and it walks like a duck and talks like a duck, and it's not a good duck, don't follow it, it's a duck. Sometimes the king has no clothes, but nobody can see that the king has no clothes. Or a few do see it, but it should be apparent to everybody, and that's what we need to talk about. So this is about cognitive appreciation, but he goes further in this saying, do not believe a thing because it's said by an authority or because it's said to come from angels, gods, or from inspired source. Krishnamurti said the same thing. Believe it only if you've explored it with your own heart, mind, and body and found it to be true. Work out your own path through this world with diligence. So he's talking not only about the cognition, which can screw us up, but the heart sense. There's a brain in your heart, and there's a brain in your body, a brain in your gut. You've got to listen to this and to this, and if anything, if these are saying no, and this is saying yes, don't listen to this one, because this is probably going to be wrong. But use all three to good intent. So this is an interesting saying that I used to struggle with in the few times that I studied Buddhism. If you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him. And this is the interpretation understood by most people. Seeing the Buddha as separate from yourself is an illusion. Kill the illusion, keep practicing. Because we all have Buddhahood in ourselves. We all are Christ. We've got Christ consciousness. We are our own Buddha. We just have to find a way to that unique way of expressing it. Each teacher can only show you what they know. Once you know that, you will add what you know and go further. Use the teachings to help you find your own truth. So that's why they say, then let go of the teachings and kill the Buddha, not before. So when you feel you've sort of reached the zenith of your learning, move on, hang on, leave. Don't hang on. Because, you might learn a few other things, but when you think you've got 95% of everything, although you might be more induced to stay because of the complacency and there's nice people there, but most of us in the last half or the last third of our lives, we don't have a lot of time, so we need to really move and get on with it. So the ancestors say, take the truth from whence it comes. And you can pretty much get the truth from anybody. Sometimes from a homeless guy, and a beggar might give you the message you need for the day. But we're talking about people who can give you real truth, and there are lots of those folks. But the ancestors also warn, sometimes truth can be ego holding to its own image. Truth can be ego holding to its own image. And this is one of the fallacies of any of these leaders, gurus, healers, and priests, and so on, is when it becomes infiltrated by ego, then be very, very careful. Then if you feel you're getting polluted, but you want to learn, better walk away and don't get polluted. Better you read the book, because you will start to adopt a lot of the stuff that's been taught is okay, but there's other stuff that's going on that you're also dealing with. I remember a surgeon saying to me in South Africa when I was coming to the United States, he said, I'll tell you one thing, just be with people who are excellent. If you are with excellence, you will stay excellent. And that's the same thing when it comes to a pollution kind of infiltration of the teacher start to leave, and maybe, Osho's a good example. His books are brilliant. I've read some of them that helped me a lot. But don't go and sit with a guy because he's totally polluted himself. We'll talk about him as well. Now, we've got to talk about the church, and obviously the Catholic Church is under a lot of grief, but in reality it happens in every religion. Nobody is exempt in every church. But the pretext by the Catholic Church that priests were morally superior, this is by a Pope, I think from some time back, who said, no, you guys are morally superior, is probably at the heart of the arrogance that allows them to do what they do, which is completely antithetical to the whole concept of what they're supposed to do. Plus the fact of celibacy. I don't know if those of you, most of you probably had the opportunity to watch the movie Zorba the Greek, but that was a classic about this guy who says, enjoy the whole catastrophe. We're here to enjoy the whole catastrophe of your life, but to enjoy it responsibly. We're not really meant to be celibate. It's okay to be celibate if you're tired of sex, or you've been there, done that. That's okay. But if you've never done it, then there's the problem. Because this is what the ancestors say. What you resist will persist. It'll get bigger in your head. What you destroy, if you're trying to push it down, will destroy you. What you defeat defeats you, but what you sanctify sanctifies you. So if you're going to do things that are maybe uncomfortable because of your conditioning, make sure you sanctify them, they're just fine. There's a story about two monks that are walking to their monastery, and they have to cross a river before they walk up the hill. And there's this beautiful woman standing on the bank of the river, scantily draped, sort of a very revealing dress. And when they get to the river, she asks them, would you mind carrying me over the river because I don't want to get my dress wet? She has no evil intention. She's just very good looking. So the one guy says, yeah, get on my back and I'll take you across. So of course she's this gorgeous woman with her legs around him and her breast pressing against his chest. And he drops her at the end of the bank, at the other side. And then his friend starts talking to him and says, you know, I don't know what you're going to do with your spiritual practice. This is going to ruin your meditation. It's probably going to take you weeks and weeks to get over this. He said, I left her at the bank. You're still carrying her with you. So this is the problem with when we start to get rid of stuff. It's not going to work. So just sanctify it and be done with it. So now this is a list, and there are many, many more. It's interesting how many there are of fallen gurus who fell for one reason or another. These guys, John Friend, these are really the American contemporary gurus who are really just gurus that, not in the true sense of the word, but they're looked up to because they've mastered postures. Postures are only the one limb of the 8 limbs of yoga. That's not to say they don't practice the other ones, but people go to them because they're incredibly masterful with the asana postures, and yes, they do breath control and other things as well. This is very good. This John Friend of Anusara is trying to redeem himself. Says if you can't publicly own it, don't do it. Which is simple but very profound. These guys though are held to a higher standard. This guy is the son of the original Desikachar. This guy embraced. He is probably the most successful of all the gurus. If you're interested, there's a DVD on Netflix called Wild Country. And he was the sexual guru. He was a proponent of tantric sex. And Tantra in the modern world has become sexual yoga in a sense. But the original Tantra was nothing to do with sex. You know, it was maybe a tiny part of sex. But this is how he attracted his devotees. The Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, now remember, all these guys did a lot of good. They were brilliant people. I'm not discounting the good they did, but this guy was more the sexual yoga. This guy was the yoga to the stars, the Beatles. He started the Maharishi University. He started TM. But you could tell by the beginning that this guy was about money, because I learned TM once. I forget what it cost, but it wasn't cheap. And they gave you a mantra that was completely private. You were not allowed under almost karmic death to tell anybody about your mantra. Probably because everybody got the same mantra, is my guess. So, you know, but he did do a lot of service, and but he had a Rolls Royce and he had a helicopter. You know, he died a billionaire, apparently. They say he was a billionaire. So, this fellow, Sai Baba, was a pedophile, you know, but he built hospitals, and he was instrumental for bringing water to villages. But he was, you know, because he did good stuff, people tended to ignore a lot of this stuff. I knew one of his devotees who really never believed in this. This fellow, Chogyam Trungpa, who founded the Naropa Institute, was a raging alcoholic. He would come to his talks completely inebriated. He could barely stand. But he was a brilliant teacher when he was sober. He was one of the major Buddhist teachers that brought Buddhism to the West. But he slept with his devotees. Some of them were married. And he was the guy, we're going to see, who wrote the book on spiritual materialism, which is interesting. Because there's this hypocrisy, the spiritual schizophrenia that you see with these guys. They say one thing and they do completely the opposite. His student was even worse. His student had AIDS, didn't tell the devotees that he slept with that he had HIV, didn't use protected sex, so probably he was a murderer. John of God has now just fallen into disrepute, but he at least is excusable because these guys had a lot of knowledge. They probably even may have been enlightened at one stage, or maybe they were all con artists to begin with and just wanted to come to the West and make themselves famous. But this guy was an incredible healer, or is an incredible healer, but he got corrupted. But he was a peasant. He doesn't have any of this knowledge or understanding. So he gets off a bit more lightly, as do these guys. These guys don't get off lightly karmically, and Ron Hubbard is one of them as well, and there are many, many more. So let's see what happens with these fallen gurus.
Could you just talk about the denominator?
Why don't you address it in I don't know enough about it, but you can address it maybe in the question time and tell us what your experience was, because a lot of people love the people. I mean, I've met, they call them Rajnishis, they still kept the Rajneesh name from Osho's time, and they will tell you this was the best time of their life and they learned so much, but there is a price to pay for what you learn. But he was really demonic. He is probably the most demonic of all of them. That's the Osho guy. So searching for the bull is a description in drawings from many centuries ago, drawn by a Zen Buddhist about the paths to enlightenment, and he describes it as searching for the bull, like seeing the footprints. It's kind of like tracking an animal, glimpsing the bull, then catching it, then taming it, then riding it, and there's a bunch of other things that are very Zen that don't apply mostly to the West, but eventually coming home and doing service. And I think when we come to talk about spiritual materialism, and also some of these yogis, what's happening here is people are getting to the footprints and the glimpsing and maybe a little bit of the catching, maybe the first two or three, and then they think they've seen it all. They understand what non-duality is. They've subordinated their ego maybe temporarily to the higher self. They've had peak experiences or maybe oneness experiences. Now they think they're enlightened. And then the spiritual materialism starts to come in. But the other guys that we were talking about, they have pretty much done all of these, so there should be no excuse. So you would imagine that they would be okay, but the fact of the matter is that the background is the Sith character who wants to take them out, because they're playing in the realm of the spiritual mafia, if you want, so they are going to be opposed. All of us have tricksters or negative things around us. But when you get into that category, when you're really, really high up along the hierarchy of energy, you are going to get attacked by seriously dark forces. Doesn't apply here, and people often get uncomfortable when I talk about it. But just think about it as mythology of stars and Star Wars, if you don't like what I'm saying. This is the spiritual materialism. I read a book some years back that this Trungpa guy wrote. It was a very good book. He self-appointed himself a Rinpoche, which means precious one. So he had a huge ego. But he said in his teaching that ego is not necessary when ego is vital. The ancestors say, if it wasn't for ego, if it wasn't for our monkey mind, if it wasn't for our shadow, none of us would be sitting in this audience. That's our survival mechanism. That's what kept us safe all the years. It's totally necessary, but it has to be subordinated to other things. So Trungpa was the alcoholic that I was telling you about, and essentially he wrote the book on spiritual materialism, but he was actually the archetype of spiritual materialism because of what happened to him. So again, here we have a guy who writes the book, so it's okay to read the book. The book was great, but when you go and you see the guy, you understand that this guy is, he's polluted, and rather read the books than stay there too long. There are actually 8 yoga limbs, and spiritual materialism often comes when you have mastered a few of them, and what is happening, the definition of spiritual materialism is you are now using your yoga or your spiritual practice, your meditation, to bolster your ego and to feel in a sense superior to what you were before. And we are all vulnerable to this. I don't think anybody here in the audience will ever be able to master, the fact that spiritual materialism leaks into our existence. The best thing we can do is just recognize it and try and keep subordinating it and pushing it down, rather than getting too involved in the idea that we are now on the way to some enlightenment path when maybe we've only got done 2 steps of a 10-step path, or 1 or 2 steps of an eight-limb path. So if anything, we should be humbled by our progress rather than arrogant about it. But we all, that's what we do. I remember when I got initiated as a Sangoma, I felt very proud of myself. And I also remember when I did these inward-bound trips, but now I was aware of it, I thought I should buy for the group a T-shirt that said, "The best thing about me is I don't have an ego." Which is kind of what Bikram, the yogi, the hot yoga guy, said. He pretty much said, "The best thing about me is I have no ego." He was a character. So a mere glimpse of reality can be mistaken for complete realization, so we have to be careful of that. Now, what's spiritual narcissism? That's one step further. That's where you feel so proud of yourself, that your ego is so huge that you can do anything that you want. That people should have total devotion, total loyalty to you. They should never question you because you are so enlightened. This is spiritual narcissism, which usually comes out of a feeling of poor self-esteem, poor self-worth, which we're going to explore a little bit later. But that same narcissism intrudes into the leaders we see around the world now. I think it was an Israeli psychiatrist who said if you look at modern-day presidents or prime ministers, most of them are narcissistic. Well, they almost have to be narcissistic to get into that kind of a position. And some of them have malignant narcissism, and we know who those are. But I don't talk about that because some people have come up to me afterwards and said, "Don't talk about that." And that's why I try to avoid it with questions as well. So this is what happens with this culting. Firstly, there's sexual promiscuity, because some of these yogis are sexually repressed themselves. So they want to explore sexuality, but they do it in a different way. They say, release your attachments and your fears, because that's holding you back, which is a good mantra in a sense. But in the case of Osho and in some others, sex was rampant. STDs were rampant in the community. Everybody is encouraged to sleep with whoever they wanted to release any of these repressive attitudes that they might have and get ahead. And not only that, but Osho actually said to some of his special devotees, you need to select out people for me because I'm going to help them along their path and give them Shaktipat through sex. And he had appointed devotees going around to certain people he'd chosen probably and said, how about her tonight, how about her next week, how about, and so on. Of course, he was celibate, so he said, no, I'm celibate, the only reason I'm doing this is for your sake. Give me a break, but what do you do? So the Guru was engaging altruistically with these people, to help them on their path. His self-abuse was accepted. Many of them were alcoholics, drug abusers. They were involved with incredible amounts of wealth and power. But it was accepted because it was said, this man has come to us to help us limited beings on our journey. And his vehicle, which is his body, will soon be released, so it has no meaning to him. Meanwhile, Osho had 93 Rolls Royces for what? He should have given them to charity. So, they were obviously tied into their attachments. They were often hidden bank accounts, and opulence was accepted in the Guru because he was special. There was also this cult hypnosis, which required that people were either in denial. They couldn't possibly go back to their friends or their family that they had pretty much divorced, and now they were broke because they usually gave all their money to the Guru. So they had to be in denial and fear of what they'd done. They were paralyzed, they could not leave. The others who sort of saw what was going on probably thought, I'm having a lot of fun here, I'm getting free meals, I'm getting great sex, I may as well stay, So there were many reasons that they stayed. Now there was even intimidation with the power play and weaponization in some cases, especially Osho. You had people parading around. They bought AK-47s. They had a shooting range, and there were guys carrying AK-47s around on the basis that people from the outside were going to come and invade them because they were so special. You can imagine what that did to the devotees if they wanted to criticize something, and there's a guy with an AK-47 sitting in the audience. So there was definitely intimidation in all of these instances in some way or another with manipulation. So the dark side of surrender, belief and faith. We've talked before about the light side of it, which can literally lead to our more and more becoming more and more of who we are. But the dark side of total trust is this, because the Guru says, release all that you know, empty your minds, because my path is the only way you're going to get there. I have channeled privileged information that can save you. And not only that, the Guru is abusive, if not sexually abusive, then emotionally abusive. But the emotional abuse was accepted as a lesson, and the other students might come to them and say, you're so lucky that he sort of broke your heart today. But that's got nothing to do with love, and we're going to talk about the love ingredient, because a lot of it has to do with fear, and fear is antithetical to the spiritual path. Then, of course, dreaming. If you dreamt the Guru, you thought, well, now you're definitely on the way, whereas projection of your mind can certainly create a dream. Not to mention that a lot of these Gurus have serious sorcery power and can intrude on your dreams if they want to and project a dream into you that may be in their favor. So corruption and power play were rampant in these instances. So don't think of this as impossible, because like I say, a lot of these people were incredibly smart. They were all looking for something. They were searching. Most of them had recognized the American dream and felt that it was a nightmare. And here was a way outside of their nightmare and a promise that they could get away from it. So the basic lesson is there's no such thing. If you see the Guru on the path, kill him, but learn what you can in the meanwhile. But if he's polluted, go somewhere else or read the book. Now, so what are the causes of the fall? Because this applies to all of us. Greed is not stilled with money any more than thirst is with salt water. Greed makes more greed. Power creates more power. A guy who's a millionaire will see somebody who's a billionaire and he'll want to be a billionaire because he's got more than enough, but greed is and envy is what's pulling them. So the focus is around persona, pride, power, fame, and that is great because it brings you money and things and free sex and an incredible amount of power. And then, of course, it feeds on itself. When you can do it, you do it more, and it's never enough. So let's look at the dynamics, some of which we've talked about before, but I'm going to summarize. These are not forces on the inside, so I've just put them in parentheses. The forces of light, your spirit guides, the tricksters, the dark forces. But this is inside of us. We have a higher self, we have an inclination to do good, and we have a spacious mind, a Buddha mind, a Christ consciousness, whatever you want to call it. But on the other side, we have our shadow or our evil inclination, which is aggravated by a wound. If we have a wound at any stage of our development which goes unacknowledged and uncared for and untreated, it's going to exaggerate the shadow, and it's going to exaggerate the projection of the shadow onto other people. In other words, the shadow and the wound gets projected onto somebody else rather than taken in as awareness for yourself and dealt with. Anybody can be redeemed. So there's no question of judgment here. Everybody has issues, and often this wound is one of the things that somebody is vulnerable to, which might affect them significantly. But they can definitely be redeemed, and we'll talk about that later. And then, of course, you've got narrow mind, monkey mind, and you've got ego, and you've got shadow or evil inclination. And the tricksters will play on your weaknesses, and the forces of the light will play on your strengths. So they'll try and make you more of who you are. These guys will try and make you less of who you are. But the whole point is to subordinate these to these. And for this, you need spiritual practice. It's an absolute essential ingredient. You need knowledge. The answer is to say, with all your strength, get knowledge. You need knowledge of the spiritual principles we're talking about, the power of karma, the sort of onerous responsibility of free will. Free will is a terrible thing to have. In fact, you can do it. If you're accountable for it, makes it a little bit more palatable. Krishnamurti said, discernment is choiceless. When you recognize that there's always going to be a consequence, that you're not going to get away with it, discernment is choiceless. And there's the samsara, which is the fact we're bound to a sensory existence, a sensory body, and that to the extent would be that we sort of give in to the senses unconsciously or without responsibility, we come back again and again through the cycle of death, rebirth. So we would like to try and get out of that if possible. So let's go a little bit further here to the things on the outside of us. So outside of us, if somebody is in a good position, for instance, they are really a saintly person, they're going to be people who are going to be envious of you. And envy, jealousy is a terrible thing. That's why there's a whole commandment that says, do not covet your neighbor or anything that belongs to your neighbor. Ever think of why there's a commandment, don't be jealous? Because jealousy can cause the evil eye, where you bad vibe somebody. May not feel good, but it's not that damaging. The evil tongue, where you can character assassinate somebody. We see that today amongst people we should look up to. And this whole political fight is about the evil tongue. It's not acceptable karmically. And the evil inclination. But the fact it works doesn't mean that that it's acceptable. The evil inclination is somebody who really has an inclination to do bad things, has a huge shadow. Is he unredeemable? No. Everybody's redeemable. But it's going to take some Christ-like or Buddha-like personality to redeem that person, or a near-death experience for them to get the awareness that they need. And the evil inclination combined with tricksters and dark forces is the source of witchcraft. I'm talking about dark witchcraft, the source of sorcery, the source of satanic forces in the communities, which are really powerful. And this is very tempting, because when you are in this position, you get tremendous power, you can get tremendous money, you can get what you want. Remember Darth Vader trying to get Luke Skywalker over to his side, saying, you don't know how much power you will have if you join me. And he was right, but it's dark power, and you don't do well if you sell yourself out. Usually you die young, or you get sick, or both. So this is on the outside, but now we're talking about that side, on the other side of the veil between worlds. These are the tricksters, the dark forces, who are going to get to these gurus, and it's a difficult path. And how do they get to them? Firstly, with overwhelming opposition. If they really are challenged, and they understand why they're being challenged, and I think this happens a lot to the Sangomas in South Africa, and maybe to some of the shamans elsewhere in the world, is that the opposition is so overwhelming that eventually they start to play both sides. I remember being told by somebody, don't be too pure. He was a bit of a sorcerer, very powerful Sangoma, but also a very powerful sorcerer. And you have to pay grift, if you like, to the spiritual mafia. If you pay your grift to the spiritual mafia, they leave you alone. So this is where the overwhelming opposition comes in, where if you do a certain amount of stuff, they just kind of leave you alone. Then there's energetic pollution, or even frank possession, where you have total soul loss and you become possessed. Now this is true, especially I wanted to draw attention to musicians. And temptation is at the heart of all this, the fact that you can do it. So if you look at some of the musicians, that have fallen, you see some interesting things. If Robert Johnson, they say, there's a story that he met the devil at the crossroads. I don't think it's a story. The devil he met at the crossroads said, if you want to be one of the greatest musicians of your time, just come along with me and I'll make you that, So whether he was polluted or whether he was actually possessed, I don't know. I'm pretty sure that if you go and look up Jimi Hendrix and you watch some of those DVDs on that man was possessed. There's the DVD of him playing the guitar with his teeth, and it's absolutely brilliant. You would have to be possessed by some, maybe light force, but they wouldn't do that because they're not about that. But, by some satanic sort of force that enabled him to do that. So he said there's nothing saintly, there's nothing good, no intention meant to be good about rock and roll. They had to get completely stoned to perform. He was a drunkard. He tried every drug under the sun. He slept with many, many women. He died at the age of 27, very sick, but he was an incredible musician. So this is what can happen, and this is what alcohol or drugs and so on can do. You pretty much, your soul just dissipates. It goes off somewhere else, and then you're just left in your body, and it happens to the gang members, and questions later. The gang members, in Mexico, who have satanic symbols tattooed on them. They're incredibly powerful. They get away with murder all the time, but they don't get away with it in the long run. But these guys are possessed because they've pretty much lost their soul. Whether they can be redeemed, I'm not sure. I think some of them probably yes. But this is what's going on the other side, and this is, the basis of some of the movies which we look at mythology. But this is cosmology. It's the way things are going. Shamans understand this because they deal with it every day. I'm not talking about the modern day shamans. I'm talking about the original ones, the original versions. The ones in South Africa certainly know that. So it's important to know, even though you don't have to worry about it. It's not relevant to this kind of an audience. The ancestors call it a costly compliment. When you get up into the 6th and the 7th chakra, or way up at the top of the tree of life, then watch out. They will come after you and try and get rid of you. It's usually easy to get rid of a male. You just send him a beautiful woman. And they do that. There's no question about it. What was the Buddha's last temptation from Mara, the demonic force, the Lucifer? It was 3 beautiful women. The armies he defeated, the 3 beautiful women are the last thing. So I know of many instances, if you look at the guy, you will not be named, but there was somebody who was a Zen Buddhist, terrific guy. I actually met him once. He really enlightened fellow who slept with one of the women who was married in his ashram, and he was excommunicated. That's not an accident, because the dark forces can manipulate your energy and your chakras and kind of accentuate your energy in your sexual chakra. Whereas the light forces, because of free will, they can't interfere with that. So if you look at the yogis and the Buddhists, they just do more spiritual practice. They don't talk to you about the spiritual mafia. So in reality, this guy fell, and as opposed to Suzuki Roshi, who founded the Zen Center in San Francisco, and he founded Tassajara, and he had this woman who came up to him one day, a gorgeous woman, and said to him, Roshi, I don't know what to do with myself. I'm just crazily in love with you. He said, don't worry about it. I've got enough discipline for both of us. So, that should be the attitude. But as opposed to Bikram, the hot yogi who got accused of sexual abuse, he says blatantly on his website, they come to me and they say, if you don't sleep with me, I'm going to kill myself. So what must I do? I sleep with him. I don't want the bad karma. Can you believe it? Such ignorance. So, you can rationalize anything you want when there's a beautiful woman in front of you, especially if you're seriously flawed. So they can do these kind of things, and it's not relevant unless you're starting to get very high up on the scale. But it's really important to know what's going on. And there are some people here in this audience who might be having to deal with tricksters that are on the spiritual path. But the only way to do away with evil is to bring in more good, to bring in light and laughter. You can't bewitch a witch. You can't do sorcery on a sorcerer unless you want to take incredible karmic consequences. All right, so free will is always neutral and is catalyzed by desire. This is the ancestors. Our choices will decide whether it's evil or good. At the end of the day, free will rules, and choice will just tell us what's going to happen. So I want to carry on with a little bit about the avoidance. You cannot say the devil or the guru or anyone made me do it. At the end of the day, it'll be our responsibility. So how do we avoid these things? This is probably the best thing. If it has a lot to do with ego and it has to do with fear, not love, then watch out. Among all who possess great wisdom, only those act wisely who act from love. And we're going to sort of talk more about that. The ancestors also say if the burden were taken away, the lesson would not be there. Coping with it is what is important and what will count. So in reality, we all have hard times and we all fail. The thing is not to look at failure as a failure. to take the crap and make it into manure, that take it as a lesson. Don't have shame, don't have any guilt, because shame and guilt are a crippling force. They have no place in spiritual transformation, none at all. Remorse and regret are fine, regret what you did and resolve never to do it again, and let it give you strong resolve to not do it again, and maybe to even improve on your spiritual practice or whatever it is. So turn everything negative into an opportunity. Make the bad good. It's all about what you do with it. It's not what happens to you, but it's how you deal with it and what your intention is for that. So don't worry about slip-ups. This is another one, because I don't know what the answer is to any of you, because each of you are unique. What I can do is teach you some of the things I've been taught. But this I like, not knowing when the dawn will come, I open every door. This is kind of the way I went about it. I didn't open every door, but a lot of people, I think most of us, don't know who we are. So the best we can do is we open the doors that seem to fit us the best. So if there's a door that looks appealing, read about it, maybe go to a workshop or listen to a lecture. And if it looks good, open the door and follow it for a while and see what happens. It took me 13 years to pretty much get a kind of a semblance of where I was going to go. So it's a long and lengthy process. So the mantra is, I'm not lost, I'm searching. As opposed to, if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. So don't open all the doors. Select your doors very carefully. And then the best sort of metaphor I can think of is like, the treasure hunt metaphor, and I've mentioned this before, is you go from clue to clue, You take the clue, this seems interesting, you read the book, you do whatever, it takes you to another clue, and then that takes you to another clue. Sometimes the clue is wrong, so then you go backwards. It's like somebody tracking an animal. When you lose the track, you go back to where you saw the track and you start again. Sometimes the clue is ridiculous. You think, that can't be right. You have a dream, or you go to a workshop and somebody says to you, you need to do this. And you say, that can't be right. Although you think, maybe it is right. And then you go on that thing, you think, this is crazy. And then at the end of that, all that happens is you get the next clue. And then you carry on your path. You never have got that clue unless you took a chance. So you never know when that critical clue is going to happen. The other metaphor I like is the Goldilocks and the Three Bears story. It's like, if the porridge starts to get stale and it's cold and it's not working for you anymore and it's not making you grow and be more of who you are, then leave the porridge alone, look for a new plate of porridge. Or if the bed gets too lumpy and too hard, then look for another bed. So it's a long and a tedious process, and it's nobody can really tell you what to do. I'm going to give you some quotes of Krishnamurti. Anybody who doesn't know his stuff should read him. He's very profound. So this is basically what the ancestors have said, that I've sort of I've taken their wisdom and made it into sort of short mantras. The value of information is its use for transformation. So don't go and do endless workshops and go to endless lectures just for the sake of getting knowledge, because we've talked about how we all have our signature strength, our core strength. With all your strength, get knowledge, but only about the stuff that's going to really make a difference to who you are going to become. Because you can go online and go to YouTube and all these amazing things. You can spend a whole day learning stuff that has no value for what you are going to do. And you will be accountable for what you did, and to the extent you filled your cup or you didn't fill your cup. You have to encompass our understandings. We have to encompass our understandings. We have to actualize them. That was the reason for last time's talk about telling your own story. That's why I told my story. Is sometimes there are those understandings that we've kind of left by the wayside. We need to bring them back and renew them, because they're really important, and maybe write them down as mantras or whatever they are, because maybe we've forgotten them. There might be an aha experience you had on some amazing trip, and you thought to yourself, now I know this is what I'm going to do. This is what I'm going to do. And then because life intrudes, you've left it by the wayside. Go back to that and see and explore it. Or a dream you had as a teenager, or literally of what you wanted to do, or in the dream time of what you've had a dream to do. Encompass or actualize the understanding of that. Look at sense, common sense rather than cognition, and follow your knowing, your intuition. Follow those of you who have an ancestor practice, or those who don't, I highly recommend it. Follow their guidance. You'll get intuitions, you'll get downloads. Some get it in the daytime. You get this like light going off. Another lady was talking to me about that. Every now and then she gets a light going off in her head. Well, that might be your ancestors copying and pasting into your head because they know you need that message at the time. So be wary of cognition, of data. You know, Einstein himself said not everything that counts can be counted, and not everything that can be counted counts. We tend to rely too much on information and data. Follow your inner knowing, your dreams, and so on. Imagination and intuition again versus intellect. Remember the power of imagination. In terms of manifestation, we've also talked about this before, but very briefly, you have to, because free will is the cosmic law, you have to ask to receive, and you have to ask specifically for what you want. You can't say, help me with my life, I don't know what to do. They can't help you with that. But you can ask for something specific. So the best way to do it is to go into an altered state of consciousness and put your intention into the field, you know, into your ancestors, to God, whatever you want to call the force, you know, universal intelligence, it doesn't matter. Put it into the field and imagine how you want it to unfold in as much detail as you can. The context is what will count. They don't care about the details. They just want to have an overall idea of where you're going, and then they have permission to help you. Then the next step is release completely from any attachment to outcome. As we know, attachment to things have a stickiness and tend to push them away. The same thing is in the spirit world. Also, if you're too attached to the thing, and you're saying it and you're doing the meditation and the imagination 4 times a day, your subconscious is going to say to you, this guy doesn't believe it, you know. Why is he so attached? So your subconscious will override your conscious and it won't happen. So don't be attached to it. Let the universe handle the details and believe in it, even though it's going to be very slow and tedious, because remember, on the other side of the veil, there is no time. So sometimes things crop up 15 years later, but they will happen if you keep on with the message. And that's the other thing. You have to maintain, sustain, affirm, repeat, because free will is in the present moment for them up there. They have to know, do you still want this today? Do you still want it next week? Do you still want it next month? That's where the affirmation comes in. Free will is huge, and giving permission is very big. And love even over wisdom and virtue, because you can have wisdom, as these gurus had, without love, doesn't count. Counts a little bit, but not much. And you can have virtue if it's just obedience, you know, if you kind of like obedience training, you know, you kind of terrified of hell and damnation because of, you know, the church has told you that what's going to happen to you. If you're virtuous on that behalf, that has much less appeal to your spiritual tribunal when you go across, as opposed to just being virtuous for its own sake. So love is key here. So that's sort of some of the things I wanted to talk about, and I thought that now we just do a little meditation, focus maybe on one aspect of it, or meditate any way you want, and we'll just have a meditation and take a break. So take some deep breaths, and like usual, breathe in white light. And what's the white light you want to breathe in from the talk? What do you want to bring home from the talk? And breathe out what you want to get rid of as thick black smoke. Relax completely. Relax your face, your neck, your forehead, your shoulders. Expand your lungs completely. Full breaths. And either do an imaginative exercise on what come to you in the talk, or what you need to hold on to, or just follow the breath.
dark is part of the plan. We all have both the dark and light side. Light outside the dark is part of the plan. We all have both the dark and light side. Good or evil must operate freely. Evil or good must operate free. This assists the soul's perfection and enhances the soul's light. The soul's light. You're never powerless against the dark unless you choose to accept their news. You're never powerless against the dark unless you choose to accept their news. Tricksters can use your weaknesses to deter you from your light. There's nothing you can think that they don't know, that they won't try to undermine, to undermine. Their best defense is persuading you that they do not exist. Their best defense is duping you that they never exist. If you dispel the darkness, fill the space with light. If you dispel the darkness, fill the space with light. The space with light. Do not be willing, pray to thieves, pity thieves of spirit. Do not be willing, pity thieves, beware of birds.
When you're ready, you can slowly come back. All right, let's take a 10-minute break because we want to have time maybe afterwards for another meditation. And 10 minutes and we'll do the second part. All right, so second part of the talk, just while everybody settles down. These are quotes by Krishnamurti, who I think is really quite an amazing guy. If you're interested in reading his stuff, if you haven't, there's actually, he had a school and a place, he has it still in Ojai, he's deceased now, But there's a little library of his in Ojai. You can go and visit it, and you can watch some of the DVDs and look at the books and get a sense of who he was. But he was a special guy who pretty much said, nobody can tell you what to do. You've got to find your own way. And he sort of rejected any sort of leadership role at all. So let's talk about the four basic. Can everybody hear me? And they're still up a bit. How about now? Better? All right. So we talked way back when about the four directions, and I wanted to relate it to the archetypes. And we talked also about the four basic archetypes of healer, teacher, warrior or leader, or adult, and visionary, the four basic archetypes. We also talked about how that can take many, many forms. A healer can be hundreds of different things. It doesn't have to be a nurse or a doctor or anything like that. So I want to put it in the context of the four directions because they do speak to the phases of life. The child, which is in the south, at least in this tradition, which is the healer, which is the first chakra, because the first chakra is your survival chakra, and where the caregiver is so vitally important. So we go from the child of the south to the adolescent of the west, and this is summer, and this is fall. Because it's fall, the color is black. It's the time for introspection. The hormones are raging, so it's the second chakra. It's when the elder is so critical for the adolescent who can help guide them to the north or guide them to the east eventually. So this is a time of introspection and also a time of so-called dark night of the soul. And here we have the adult, the leader, the warrior, the third chakra, which is the power chakra, the way we make our way in the world, this chakra down here. And this is where role models are so important. And then over here, this is winter, and of course winter is the time when we need a good chief. This is Native American, of course. We need to have a good chief who can see us through the winter, literally and metaphorically, and store up for the winter ahead of time so that we don't have to starve because we haven't made preparations. So these are all very, very much indigenous and very basic archetypes when life was different, was simple, even though the life was very difficult. And then finally here, after leaving the winter, we come back to spring. We have the east, the place of vision, the elder, the visionary, all the manifestations of the visionary, which we'll talk about later, where the wisdom teachers, which is what you guys are after, are so critical. And the question is whether we've done it right and we come back into, and we don't have to come back into this and do the whole thing all over and over again. Did we follow our destiny? Did we follow the other laws of karma? Or did we resign ourselves to our fate? Did we resign ourselves to the cards that we were dealt in life? Remember, anybody can be redeemed. So free will is key to this way, and I give respect to Angelus Arian for the archetypes, and most of this sort of is based on very loosely on the Lakota tradition. But I think everybody should have their own four directions. They belong to everybody. Isaiah had a vision of the six directions millennia ago, so the directions don't belong to anybody. But if we're going to do vision quests or anything of that nature, in terms of the Native Americans, we have to be very respectful of the fact that they say, you stole our land and now you're stealing our spirituality as well. So we have to be a little bit careful of that. So let's talk about the South, the healer, the wounded child of the South who often becomes a healer. Why do they become a healer? Why did Angelus Arian put the healer there? Because often the wounded child of the South who is aware of the wound and actually goes to the trouble of taking care of the wound and heals the wound often becomes a healer because she or he then has the capability of helping others, not to mention the compassion and the heart and the will to want to help others. So I want to talk about the shadow side. We're talking about the shadow side of all these archetypes because that's what this talk is about. How are we going to fall? What's going to get us into trouble, especially if we're unaware of, the shadow part of our particular archetype. Remember that all of these archetypes are part of all of us. We don't just have one archetype. So everything applies here to everybody as well. So let's look at this a little bit more carefully. If we cannot embrace the other, do not think to embrace God. This is the ancestors. So if we cannot embrace our own child, how much more so? The fact of the matter is, in indigenous societies, it was much easier. Now life intrudes. Parents are bouncing many balls. I would doubt that many of us here are perfect parents. Those that have children, we all screw up, but we kind of do our best. But we're going to be talking more about somebody who's totally neglected, which doesn't apply really here, but it's good to look at it because of the attachment theory. Now, I'm not a psychologist, so I'm not going to go into this very much, but I have my own views about how this would work on an indigenous spiritual basis, which is completely different to a psychological basis. This is going to create a huge wound. Attachment theory states that a strong emotional and physical attachment to at least one primary caregiver is critical to personal development. It doesn't have to be a mother or father, it can be a grandfather, an uncle, an aunt. It can even be a tribe. Sort of referred last time to the Bushmen. If you think of their kids, the child is on the mother's back until they can walk pretty much, and it's weaned very late, and it sleeps around the fire with the parents at night. It has unconditional love from the mother, but also from the whole clan, because that's the way they act. You can imagine how whole and wholesome those children turn out to be, but of course life is very much difficult for us now. So the psychologists talk about the pathology of this, of a very deficient attachment syndrome. And the worst is the insecure avoidant who has absolutely no attendance whatsoever and learns to live only in a physical reality, devoid of emotion. They become very independent and they don't seek comfort. They are really kind of shut down. Does that mean they're ruined? No, they can all be redeemed. But they need to have the awareness and the skills to be redeemed either later on in childhood or maybe as they go around the cycle of life. So that's the insecure avoidant. There's also an insecure ambivalent variety, and that variety is an ambivalent parent who sometimes is okay and then the other time neglectful, leads to a confused child who is ambivalent about the parent or the caregiver because it doesn't know what to expect. So it tends to be needy and wants to reach out because it's scared it's going to be neglected. But when it gets attention and love, it usually withdraws. And this has effects on us later on in life. But the secure child, who's very secure, who's safe, who's seen, is the child who can explore the environment without fear because it always has a backup system. It knows the parent or somebody's going to be there as a backup system. So we can see that I'm not going to go try and editorialize on what these things can do, but I would imagine that this insecure, avoidant person has a very poor self-esteem, self-worth, value, and these, I would imagine, become fairly narcissistic. I would imagine also that the insecure, ambivalent child is needy of attention and admiration, or and the opposite is that they want to admire other people who they think have got special qualities that they don't have. And all of these can create wounds that need to be dealt with later in life. And I'm just talking about this particular thing because it may not apply to most of us, but it's worth knowing. This is what applies to most of us, a lack of unconditional love. In reality, I think we are all probably subject to that to some extent because there's always a reward system. You're either a good boy or a good girl. If you get straight A's, then they tend to come up to you and say, "Oh, I love you for having straight A's," Instead of "I love you because of who you are." So what does that lead to in a child who sort of doesn't have unconditional love, but does have unconditional attention? In fact, maybe overly attention, because sometimes the parent sees the child as a manifestation of their own ego and will project that ego onto the child and want the child to become a mirror image of them. You know, you see it in the bumper sticker, my child is a straight A student at so-and-so college, you know. They project their own, maybe their own deficiencies onto their child who's excellent. So the child that has this sort of situation will seek perfection instead of excellence because it what gets rewarded. And need to know, they want to accumulate knowledge because it gets rewarded. They are attached to persona because that's what their parents are attached to, and intensity rather than love, so they may have trouble in relationship because they're always ticking off the ideal partner which is never going to find anyway, and they don't find it. They tend to be performance oriented, they tend to be pessimistic and focus more about what's wrong than what's right. So I'm reminded of Roger Federer. I don't know if any of you remember that 60-minute thing they did on him, where he became one of the best tennis players in the world, and he said he hated tennis. And his father was the one who schooled him and coached him and was with him 24/7. But if at the end of the day you end up hating what you do, then as a parent you failed, you know, because in reality he was just using his own projection of himself onto his child, recognizing the child had talent and making him one of the world's best tennis players. So that's one of the examples of what can happen with the lack of unconditional love. Now there are other varieties. If the child is incompetent or inadequate in terms of maybe a sibling or something, they may have a victim mentality if they fail to perform. This really I highlighted because it applies to the healer archetype, because frequently the healer archetype is very empathetic, has a big heart, and takes on too much of the suffering of their own clients. They come home completely trashed, especially if they're very intuitive. You know, even if you're doing body work, if you're a body worker, and you're working on somebody, you kind of start to take on some of the sadness and the pain of somebody. And this usually signifies that you are a powerful healer, but you can't become a martyr to somebody else's pain. And the alternative is that if they have a bad client who is abusive and blames them for whatever it is, they tend to take that blame on themselves, and they'll spend days perseverating on the fact, like, what did I do wrong, when actually the client's an asshole and they probably need to get rid of him. You know, it's as simple as that. So it doesn't mean to say you mustn't be accountable and look at yourself. But this is what some of you, I think, in this audience are healers, and you might recognize this in yourself. It can be a shadow side of the healer. It's a good shadow because it shows you, in a sense, are a fantastic healer, but it's not good for the healer. It may be good for the client. Well, what about the adolescent archetype? This is the winter of the adolescent's discontent, if you like, because the hormones are raging. He or she doesn't know who they are. They need an elder. They need somebody to guide them, and it's hard to find somebody with all social media and all the other pressures that are on them now. So in the indigenous sense, and this is what we need to look to, there was an elder, and there was the crones, because the child, usually around puberty, the girls as well as the boys, would be taken away from the parents. And the crones would take care of the girl and lead her through whatever it was, menarche and some of the rituals that she needed to do. And the boy, I just know about the Venda people in the north of South Africa where I was with my healing center. As a boy, you would be taken into the bush for 2 months, only with a blanket, and it was winter, so it was cold, especially at night, and a bowl for your food. All you were given was cornmeal and what you could forage from the veld, and because it was winter, there wasn't much to forage. And you had a dance all day, as the girls had to do as well, till you exhausted, and you had to pay tribute to the ancestors, and then you ended up having a circumcision without anesthetic. You can imagine that any child who's gone through that, there's nothing you can do to that child that they will not be able to cope with. This is why Africans are so tough, some of them. So, but this is really important because the whole thing is not abusive. It's done through the elders. It's done to validate. They come back proud, singing their song. It's something that we don't need to completely mimic, but we need to have something in our society that fills the gap, between the adolescent and the adult here. This is why maybe some of the adults we know, especially the men, are stuck in their childhood phase. A lot of the women complain. They're looking for a mother because they haven't ever been separated from their mother. So I think we can arrange our own rituals, but it has to be done and it has to be embodied, not intellectual. This is the beauty of the indigenous thing. The Native American vision quest has become popular amongst the Westerners, and usually people are doing it in adulthood because they never got it as a child. But it's a good opportunity to spend, it's usually 4 days of fasting. You are allowed to have water. And you spend 1 day in the south as a child, and 1 day as the adolescent, 1 day as the adult, and 1 day as the visionary, looking at what you might have that's getting in your way of being all of who you are. It's pretty much, it's kind of intense to do, but something that's similar to that could be arranged by anybody for themselves, but you would need somebody to help you with it, somebody who's, that you really know could help you and not criticize you. Now, convictions, by which I mean information, knowledge, are more dangerous enemies than truth than lies. So I want to draw attention to the shadow side of the teacher. Now, it's not so much that the adolescent becomes a teacher. It's more that he needs a teacher. He needs the elder to help guide him to the north and to the west. But look at what the teachers are like these days, and it's not their fault. It's a bit like the doctors. The medical system has imposed upon the doctors what they don't want to have. And the system of education is imposed upon the teachers. Many of them don't want to be like this. They tend to start to be all-knowing than open to questions. The child who comes to the teacher and says, "How does electricity work?" And the teacher says, "Don't be an idiot, Johnny." Well, it's a brilliant question because he doesn't know how electricity works. Nobody knows, instead of sort of answering it in a proper way. They attach to outcome and control. They detach from the student. It's all about results. They'll even upgrade their students because they have to look good. They are emotional and reactive as opposed to passionate about the subject. They often are judgmental and discerning and not discerning. Critical rather than supportive. Curriculum-based versus learning-based, biased. Disciplinarian and punitive rather than correcting and encouraging. Now, I grew up in a society like that. Basically, we had to learn by rote. We had to, memorize everything. I had what was called a brilliant math teacher. Did pretty well in math. I didn't understand anything about math. I just knew the answers because she gave us rules. So this wasn't a good thing because to this day I don't know anything about trigonometry or geometry, even though I passed the test. So that's what we're talking about. Now, if anybody has watched Roger Moore's movie where he goes and he lays claim to different countries, it's very funny, and he goes to Finland and he asks them, why is it that they have the best education system in the world? And they said, we don't have tests and we don't have homework. Tests are for certain people who do tests well and not for every child. They are allowed to play and they're allowed to be children, and our main focus is to make them happy. So if you look at that, and I know a few people have done homeschooling with their kids, and I've always thought, well, this can't be good. They're never going to get their SATs done. They do great, because they want to learn, and when they're ready to learn, they learn. And the stuff they learn experientially, and they enjoy what they're doing. So in a way, I didn't enjoy school. I didn't enjoy medical school because it was the same sort of thing. We weren't taught, the beauty in some of the things we were learning, rather than the fact you're going to kill somebody if you didn't know it, and they would shame you if you didn't know it. So this is the shadow side of the teacher. It has a good side. I think the best side of it in South Africa, we had no television. So as soon as I got out of school, I could be a kid again, But it wasn't good in terms of my learning. It was good for medical school because all you have to do to be a doctor is sit on your backside and memorize stuff. You don't have to be that bright to be a physician. You shouldn't be a mathematician or a physicist if you're good at medicine. So this is what the ancestors say, is that if you look at this thing as we're going through the phases of life, Information is not to be equated with knowledge. Now you can get everything on your iPhone. You don't need to know anything. But that's a problem. You need to know stuff. You need to be able to understand stuff and know stuff, because what happens when there's a cybernetic failure? You're going to be up a creek without a paddle. Knowledge is not to be equated with understanding. So this is where we are with teaching. This is their job. But the wise teacher is going further. Understanding is not to be equated with wisdom. There's no reason why a child can't understand this. So if we look at the understanding that the political establishment has, the current political situation is that if you have a smart lawyer and you know all the loopholes in the law, you can pretty much do what you want. You will find a loophole and you'll be able to do what you want. And this is understanding, but it's not wisdom, because the wisdom chief of the tribe didn't get involved in wars. He stored up for the winter. He was worried about, not so much about being chief next year, but he was worried more about what was going to happen to the people if they all starved to death in the winter. Now, when you get further along the path of what the ancestors teach, wisdom is not to be equated with virtue, which is what we kind of said before. The fact that you are wise, like the guru, doesn't mean you're virtuous. And virtue is not to be equated with holiness. Because you can be virtuous because of fear, not out of love, and not out of doing things for their own sake, and then it's not holiness. So I'm not saying that there are many teachers who can guide the student all this way around, but the true amazing teacher, and they do exist, is actually looking at the East and saying, what is this kid likely to become? And then saying, well, he's going to go through the north, because you can't skip directions, just like you can't skip chakras. You have to manifest each one and actualize each one before you get here. But the wise teacher is going all the way around to the east to see what the child really needs, which seems to be much more likely if you're a child growing up in Finland than if you're a child growing up in the United States today. So let's look at the adult. The adult is, the good thing about the adult, skip 2, is that the end does not justify the means. It does on very rare occasions, but this is what happens, is that the end justifies the means. Politically, if your character assassinate your opponent, and you win, then you've justified what you've done, even though karmically you haven't. See yourself in others. This is Dhammapada saying, see yourself in others, then whom can you hurt? What harm can you do? This is versus the ego-bound adult leader archetype, which seems to be pervasive all over the world, especially in Eastern Europe, especially in Africa, and especially now, in Britain and here. We have people who are narcissistically inclined, they have a huge ego, and they have anger, they have pride, they are powerful. It causes chaos and destruction. Now, the important thing about, and this is understood at an indigenous level, the adult leader of the North controls the whole directions. That shadow of the adult will be projected onto everybody. It's not localized to him. The one who was most worried about it was Jung. When you see of the most demonic person who's yet been on the planet probably is Hitler. Is Jung said, be careful of Hitler way back, because he is projecting not only his shadow onto Germany, but it's going to be projected all over the planet. And he was very aware of what he was saying. So if you are somebody, a leader of a country, then your anger, your pride, your power is going to project it certainly on the whole community and even beyond that. So this is really, really important to know. What's going on the planet today. We're at a very critical point of balance here, and hopefully we're going to do the right thing. Nearly all men can stand adversity, but if you want to test a man's character, give him power. Power corrupts, and complete power corrupts completely. It's that greed thing. If you've got power, you want more power, and that can be a toxic recipe for disaster. So let's look at the warrior. Now there's definitely, I didn't have time to put the slide up, but if you go online and you see what conscious businesses are doing, spiritually oriented businesses, where there's a spiritual warrior in charge, that are doing the antithesis of this. It's going on now. Not only is it going on, but it's successful and it actually is productive. They do very, very well. The one I know that springs to mind is Patagonia. It's not about the bottom line as opposed to Walmart, you know. So there is that going on. And when people start to recognize that it's profitable, if it becomes more profitable than what they're doing, they'll do it, you know, but it has to become profitable, unfortunately, first. So this warrior disempowers others and lacks respect. And we can talk about gurus, we can talk about leaders, we can talk about healers, we can talk about anybody, any one of those. They're authoritarian. They don't walk their talk, they talk their walk, and sometimes very eloquently. But you just look and you'll see that it's not what they say. They talk about right and wrong. There's nothing good about talking about right or wrong. They're self-righteous versus effective. And, you know, there's another saying, never in doubt, frequently wrong. They think they're right, but they're actually wrong. And they think they're always right, but they're actually wrong. And even if they're right, they're self-righteous rather than effective. We see this in Congress now. Everybody is kind of attached to their own thing. They don't care that they're not getting anything done. They'd rather be right than be effective. They're unaware of wounds and they project their shadow. They judge other people. They tend to be narcissistic sometimes. They use power negatively. Now there's the flip side of those who are in the warrior role, but they're not in charge. These are the ones that ride on the coattails of powerful people. They don't show up. They tend to want to favor the warrior, to please the warrior, and by pleasing the warrior they please themselves. Maybe they make more money. They were living in a good place. You know, some places they call it the golden handcuffs. It's rather than pleasing your little self with a small s, they should be pleasing the higher self, and they don't. So that's the shadow side of the warrior. Now, we're all striving to be in the visionary side, and I want to talk about those ingredients. The antidotes to this is forgiveness, compassion, empathy, love, joy, humor. You see somebody who's got no sense of humor, who's in a position of power, and as a teacher, be a little bit careful. And true humility. Not humility because they want everybody to think they're humble. So now we're in the east, and if you look at the chakras, these are the lower chakras, first, second, third. Now we're above the diaphragm. This is the fourth, the heart chakra. So this might be the healer archetype who's in the visionary phase. Maybe it's somebody who was a nurse who's now a Reiki master. Different thing. Warrior, nurse. Reiki master, visionary. Fifth chakra, the chakra of creative expression. Creative expression as in the artist or the musician or the dancer or the poet or the author or anybody like that. That's the different kind of visionary archetype. Sixth chakra, the third eye of intuitive wisdom. So the shaman, the psychic, the chiropractor who's actually seeing and feeling things that go beyond the training, or the body worker who's feeling energy and evaluating chakras even though she's doing body work. So this is the sixth chakra. It's not confined to the guru or the shaman, but it can be. It's often confined to just ordinary people doing ordinary work, but nobody knows why their work's so great, because they're connecting with a much bigger part of themselves and connecting with their spirit guides. Remember, if you are connecting with your spirit guide, you are only as powerful as your guides are. They will take you from here to there, and without them you go back there. So this is what these guys are doing. At every level of, they don't get any credit, nobody knows, except maybe a few people who work with them. Seventh chakra, of course, is more the priest, the sage, the saint, I say guru with my tongue in cheek. those kind of people that have mastered the seventh chakra and actually have mastered it. You know, the Dalai Lama seems to be there. If you look at him, you see the guy's innocent. Anybody who's met him says he's got he doesn't take life seriously. He's more like a child. He's very funny and he likes to laugh a lot. That's a good sign. So this is where we are with the visionary. But there is a shadow side to the visionary. Lacking love in the face of awareness and knowing. See, then there's no excuse. There's no excuse. Acquisitive rather than non-attached. Having 93 Rolls Royces and saying I'm non-attached doesn't work. Judgmental rather than discerning, compassionate and forgiving. This is often a trap when you're a visionary, is you become impatient with people who are not in your level of understanding. There's a story about a guy called Simon Bar Yochai, who escaped from the Romans from persecution and went to live in a cave and was an enlightened sage. And he came out of the cave and he couldn't stand the fact of the way people were behaving. He couldn't take it. So God sent him back to the cave for another year. He said, you're not ready to do your work because you're too bloody arrogant, basically. Get back in the cave. And, in the way of, I guess, Jesus would have said, forgive them because they don't know what they do. This can be judgment at another level, just intolerance of other people. Prideful but speaks about humility. This is really the guru thing. Manifest duality but talks non-duality. This is another thing I have trouble with, is this thing that ego is not necessary. You should live in a world of non-duality. Well, how is that possible without, breaking your leg or having an accident? You can do it when you're in the oneness experience. You can understand oneness, but then you become, and we have to live in duality. But nobody teaches that I've heard of. I'm sure they do, but none of these other people who are talking about samadhi and satori and the yogis that are in the state all the time. It may be, but I don't know. Not for most of us anyway. They lack humor and joy. They imply they can explain the unexplainable, when nobody can. They do not encompass their own teachings. They're hypocritical, they lack integrity, they're defensive. It's like spiritual schizophrenia, if you like. It's like what they do and what they say are two different things. Teachings have a hidden agenda. In the case of the musician or the artist, they sell out for the sake of money. And when you sell out, you often lose your muse. Often, these people are often aware that they have a muse or they have a spirit guide. Lady Smith Black Mombaza says, no, we get our music from the ancestors. And when you acknowledge the muse and you don't sell out, they keep coming. When you start to pander to what the market wants, which seems to be the case with some brilliant musicians, because sometimes you can't recognize what's supposed to be good music. It's number one, and I look at it, I think, what's going on here? This song's number one. At least the music, previously you understood why it was number one. And then of course we talked about where they're overtaken by sex, drugs, rock and roll, whatever you want to call it. They have soul sickness, soul loss, they're polluted, and they just become a vehicle for trickster spirits and for their work. So speaking truth to power, you can speak truth to power at the level of the warrior stage, but you can speak truth to power at the level of the visionary stage. And remember, all these archetypes, the shadow side overlaps with all of them. They look similar, but they're slightly different. They're just taking to another level of vibration and so on. It's interesting, we're talking here about spiritual power. Obviously, the Dalai Lama is not going to win a seat in Congress, no matter what he does. I took a group of noetic science folks to the Kalahari Desert in the 2000, and I had an incredible group. The leaders of the noetic science travel thing were there, and I guess they selected some special people. But the people, we had the most amazing trip. The trip physically was a disaster because it rained like hell, the biggest floods in South Africa. All the game reserves were underwater. But the wonderful thing is we spend most of our time with the bushmen. trying to emulate their way of existence, to try and be Bushmen-like if we could. And the best way we did that was with the council circle we would have once or even twice a day. And the whole point of the council circle is that the leader, who is supposed to be me, should be invisible. Well, it was easy to be invisible because there was people much more eloquent and much more self-actualized than I was. And I remember we had a general with us, I don't know what star he had, very amazing guy. He was on this trip, and he came to me at the end of the trip and he said, "Dave, you know what the secret to power is?" And I said, "No." He said, "The secret to power is not having power." And I thought that was incredibly profound, and I think he got that from the Bushmen, because the Bushmen were unbelievably skillful in everything they did, whether it was their hard skills or their soft skills, the ability to trance and dream and do incredible things like enlightened people do, and also to manage to live in a desolate wilderness and live very well with their incredible abilities. So he was completely, I think, overwhelmed by the power of the Bushmen, who are incredibly humble people. Their neighboring Tswana people who've victimized them, call them savages, which is usually the case, that with people like that. So what are the warning signs? I would say that, if the person's got a big ego and it manifests in any way whatsoever, we've talked about all the way it can manifest, be careful. If they're rigid and they lack humor, be careful. If they're hypocritical and they don't walk their talk and they lack love, be careful. In other words, a sage on the stage as opposed to a guide on the side. No one can show you the way. They can open a door for you, and you can open and go that door, and then eventually you're going to kill the Buddha and then move on. So I think I'll take questions, and then we'll, if there's time, have a meditation. Yeah.
Okay, so I followed Swami Vijjananda, and then when he passed away, he passed the...
Hang on one second.
So this doesn't feel on. Is this on? No, it's green.
Anyway, carry on. Just maybe stand up.
Okay, so Swami Vijjananda was my guru for many, many years, and then when he died, he passed, he was with Guru Maya since she was
There we go.
she became guru. So she started, she became the guru.
Not working. My battery's flat. Okay, just project your voice.
Okay, so, did you hear me so far?
Yes.
Okay, I followed Swami Vijjananda for many, many, many years, and when he was ready to pass on, he passed the power to Guru Mai, this beautiful young woman who was with him ever since she was 5 years old. And she was his interpreter for a long time and so on, and then now she's the guru currently. And anyway, I loved her and I loved him and everything. And then I was living in Ventura, and I prayed at my altar one night because I thought I'd look around Santa Barbara for a place to live. And I prayed to Guru Mai and asked her to please guide me in Santa Barbara. So I was with a realtor, and we went to a few places, and I couldn't afford any of them. So she said, well, I'm going to take you to a mobile home park. So she took me to Rancho Santa Barbara. She showed me a few places. I didn't like them. And then we passed the place for sale, and I said, well, that's huge. So she said, come back tomorrow, and we'll look at it. So when I went inside, over the bed, there was a picture like this of Swami Vijjananda, and another picture like this of Guru Mai. And I loved the house, and I still live there. And I thought, how did she do that? So I wanted to ask you, how does that work?
Well, you asked and you received. Simple as that. If you're very connected to your guru, it may not be that she did it for you. It may be that your own ancestor now had been given permission, because we all have guides. We all have guides. Some of them are ancestors, some of them were ancestors way back. And when you ask to receive from the universe, it doesn't matter who answers. they're all connecting there. Everybody's together. So it may have been one of your spirit guides who gave you. But it may have been her as well. I mean, in fact, you're very close to her, and she's on the planet, right?
Yes.
And it may have been one of her guides that she's been working with, because it would have been easier for her to come to you if she was on the other side. But now she's on this side, she's busy, she's doing work, but she's got a lot of other powerful guides around her, so maybe that's what happened. But don't doubt it for a minute. Yeah.
My question is the spiritual mafia, and maybe I can understand all of it, but you said somebody said to you, don't be too pure. But can you talk more about what does that actually look like?
Yeah, it's a good question. The reality is that the answer to say tricksters are like mosquitoes at the picnic, I remember when I was hunting and gathering with the bushmen, and the one bushman took a shot at an antelope and he missed completely. I mean, the arrow went like this. He went like this, parabisi, which means tricksters, So those are the mosquitoes at the picnic. All of us have tricksters around us, but they're usually innocuous. They kind of just play with you. They're bored. They've got nothing to do. They play around, like with Ouija boards, If you had a Ouija board and you say, well, I want my mother to come through, and they come through with information about your mother, and you say, that's amazing, my mother came through. But they are not localized in space and time. They have information about your mother, and they can tell you about your mother and make you believe they're your mother, but they're not your mother. So that's what tricksters do. So those are the mosquitoes at the picnic. We all have those. The Bushmen had that in the hunt. I didn't understand what it meant. I sort of understood then. Then, I take it further. Some of us have wasps at our picnic. So then, you're getting a little bit higher up the chakra hierarchy. And now they're saying, yeah, maybe it's time to get rid of this person before they get too full of themselves and too full of light. So then you have wasps at your picnic. And then you start thinking, what the hell's going on with my life? I just went to this talk with somebody and everything's gone to hell. Or I went to see a shaman and they told me what to do. And ever since I started the rituals, it's worse. Well, that often happens with my clients. I tell them, don't worry if things get worse, just keep doing the practices, because they want to stop you from doing the practices. So those are the wasps at the picnic. Now when you get to these guys, the gurus, and you get to a guy like Jimi Hendrix, who's totally gifted, he had the gift to begin with, you're going to have rattlesnakes at your picnic. Because why a musician? A musician has incredible power. We're going to do a whole talk on it next year. You can affect people with music more than anybody else can affect people with anything. So in reality, if you look at Lucifer, Lucifer was not only the most beautiful of God's angels, he was the best musician in heaven. So the Lucifer equivalent, or the Mara, or the Sith, or whatever you call them, is going to look at Hendrix and say, here's an opportunity, we can get this message out and people won't even know what's going on with them. So along comes Hendrix or some of these other guys, the music starts to be pretty damn good, then they sell out and the music becomes quite demonic. And if you watch Hendrix, he burns his guitar on the stage, he destroys his instruments. The guy's completely gone. He's out of his gourds, as they say in South Africa. So that's now when you have mambas at your picnic. You know about the deadly black mambas in South Africa. If you dream a black mamba in South Africa and you're a Sangoma, it means they're after you. So when you are on a spiritual path, you become visible to the forces of darkness. And if you are a priest, a shaman, a healer, or anything, and you become visible, somebody came up to me in the break, you are already in the field. You are able to negotiate the field. You are having deep meditations. I'm sure it happened to Jesus when he went into the desert. It happened to the Buddha. It happens to all of them. Then you've got the real heavy-duty guys, the spiritual mafia, if you want. And when you say, they said to me, don't be too pure, if you pay grift to the spiritual mafia, it's the same as on the planet. They come around every month and you pay them off, so that they leave.
How would you pay the spiritual mafia?
A woman comes to you, case of this same guy, you do bones for her, you're attracted to her, you sleep with her. That's what happened with this guy. He was doing it even when I was there. And he was an incredible guy. I learned a lot from him, but I never got initiated with him. Fortunately, he did say to me, your ancestors will choose who's going to be your teacher. There was no way they were going to choose this guy. So he was playing both sides. Why? Because, if you think of it, in South Africa, here's a guy who grew up in apartheid. He had nothing. He didn't have shoes, probably. He was very well educated. He was lucky. He had a master's degree from my university. He was going for a PhD when he got called by their ancestors. So now he's in a position of power, and his main thing is, I've never had a car. I want a car. I can sleep with whoever woman I want. I can sleep with her. The best way I heard it described is I was tracking with an African game guide in a big game park because we were looking at medicinal plants. And this friend of mine was a co-author on the plant book we did about medicinal plants in the bush. It was close to the Kruger National Park. And we had this ranger who was there with a rifle because there were lions and elephant and buffalo and everything around. And his mother was a Sangoma. But he was a Christian, but he knew a lot about the stuff. And he would say, you see this medicine here, if you do this and do this with this, you can get any woman to sleep with you. That's witchcraft. So if you are, somebody comes to you as a Sangoma, this is the soft side of witchcraft. And they say to you, I love this woman, or I'm attracted to this woman, I want to sleep with this woman. They say, well, just do this ritual and put this stuff in a drink. When you go out, you'll have her. That's witchcraft. But I would say probably half the Sangomas you go to in South Africa think they're doing okay. They are doing that kind of stuff. That's what allow the spiritual mafia to leave you alone. They say, that's okay, this guy's sold out. He's sold out. He doesn't, he's not there anymore. And in fact, my teacher warned me. He said, you do this stuff, your ancestors will leave you, and then you will have no power. You will be like nobody. You'll have nothing. Your bones won't speak. Nothing will happen. He said, but also what he didn't add was that if you want to, and this is what this game ranger was telling, he says anybody can be a witch. All you have to do is you have to go to another witch and you buy a snake from the witch. This is the African way of describing it. You buy a snake from the witch. And he says that snake will bring you whatever you want, by which he probably means a black mamba. You will have women, you will have power, you will have money, but you will have to feed your snake every day. And if you don't feed your snake, he will eat you, he will eat your family, he will eat your children. He says, and this is what happens to all these people. Jimi Hendrix, they get sick, they die young. If you look at exorcism, which has been practiced still to this day by the Catholic Church, very wisely and endorsed and actually reinforced by the Pope, the current Pope, because it was tending to fall by the wayside in favor of psychotherapy, which is going to never going to work. There are guys who prepare to do this heavy-duty work who will take on exorcism. And there was an exorcist, I think Larry King had him on one of his shows. It was very interesting. He said, some of them are possessed with more than one spirit, and then you get rid of one, but you don't get rid of them all. These are people, it can't happen to anybody. It happens to people who've got their soul's gone, their aura is broken. If they haven't gone to drugs, sex, and rock and roll, then they've probably been in some satanic cult, or they've had severe abuse issues. It doesn't happen. It cannot happen normally. So that's kind of what goes on, without getting too elaborate. That it happens in this. The other thing that Larry King said to this guy, he said, "Can you always do it?" He said, "No, sometimes I fail." And he said, "You'll find there's a little woman who's possessed with like 4 spirits, it'll take 10 men to hold her down. She's got unbelievable strength. You know, that's how he plays the guitar with his teeth. So when you look at, you know, the Darth Vader thing of Star Wars and you see the Sith, it's only going to happen if you're Luke Skywalker. It's not going to happen to anybody else. But if you're Luke Skywalker, they're going to try and bring you over to that side or at least pollute you. So thanks for the question. Yeah.
So I'm curious, when you're talking about Jimi Hendrix and other musicians who are just unbelievably talented. And I've read a lot where they've done brain studies on people that are incredibly creative. I mean, artists and musicians and so forth, singers and everything. And that they found that the right side of their brain is much more, I think it's the right side, creative side is much more active than normal or average people. But yet at the same time, the hand in hand with that, there's frequently depression or bipolar disorder or other types of mental illnesses. And so how do you put that together with what you're talking about? Are you saying that person, if they have those things going on, are more likely to respond to the evil spirits? Or,
No.
or and conversely, like if they were young, could you prevent them from?
Yeah, you know, bipolar and all that's very, very treatable. You know, you can be bipolar and be very creative and not turn to the dark side. What it takes turning to the dark side is this destruction of your aura. That, you know, whatever it is, whatever pathology you've added to what you've already got, has now destroyed your connection with the soul. The ancestors say that the soul and the body should be like this. But when you say sex, drugs, and rock and roll, the soul is pure. We all have Buddha's soul, Christ's soul. The soul sees what's going on with the body and it starts to separate. So I would say that somebody who is like this and has got bipolar or whatever he's got and has got the muse that's of the light, which you can also have. I mean, you don't have to sign on to the dark. Often they are the light. You know, look at Van Gogh. I mean, the guy was a bit crazy, but he still held to his work, you know. Now, whether he cut off his ear because they were trying to get him to go to the dark, I don't know. No, you don't have to, you know, the psychological disposition has no relationship to what the dark forces want to do with you and what they want to manipulate you with. So, you know, so if you look at Rajneesh, why did he attract thousands of people? Sex is the thing. Others did things, but usually they were just indulging in their own sex. But he was using sex, he was advocating it. And he had all sorts of weird, very intellectual ideas and talks about, you know, the 6 secrets of sex, and that you should do this because this will make you enlightened. And this, of course, led to a lot of soul loss, not to mention in his top devotees, one of whom I know. She went to jail for 2 years. She's South African. She just got released a few years ago because the DA went after them. So, you know, that's the problem. When you think of the Rajneesh affected so many people. He had thousands of people who came to him. Thousands of people have read his books. And I wouldn't say that the books may not have some pollution in them, because if you go online, I did this morning just to check out a few things, there's some teachings there that if you listen to them, you'll go wrong, especially around sex. Any other questions? Yeah.
Can you speak to the difference between your karmic lessons and obstacles in your life as opposed to the wasps and
Yeah. The karmic lessons and obstacles. You see, the reality is that your ancestors, if they are of the light, cannot interfere with free will. It's taboo. Whereas the dark forces, the tricksters, or whatever they are, you know, the mosquitoes or maybe the wasps, they can do what they want. They don't have to abide the laws of free will. Fortunately, we know eventually by history that good will overcome evil. I don't know why that is, but it's obviously because of the Great Spirit that at a certain level is going to implode. But what will happen is, you see, if you're on a spiritual path and you are heading, say, for the crown chakra or kete at the top of the tree of life, the opposition gets the most hectic at the top. And then the ancestors aren't allowed to interfere. They can help you to some extent. But if you look at the story of Job, in the Bible, you familiar with it? So the devil came to Job, and at least came to God and said, I will make Job renounce you. He will curse you. And God said, well, why don't you go ahead? He gave him free rein. That's not going to happen with anybody else. You're not going to have free rein, There's a limit. Everybody has their day, and they cannot continually be allowed to do what they do. But there's a certain, and I don't know how it works, I don't have a clue, but I have sort of a sense of how it works, that when you get to the top, and I'm talking about the tree of life, the Kabbalists say the combination of light and dark becomes maximal there because they don't want you to get to Kete. So what will happen then is that often the ancestors have to step back and see how worthy you are. Are you really worthy of getting up there? And if you're not, then you're not going to get up there. And if you overcome it, so that's where the tests become a test of your spiritual validity. How powerful are you? How much of a spiritual warrior are you? Are you going to stay down there because you're not worthy? Or are you going to get to the top? Very few people get to the top. That's the honest truth, because you can see what happens when you get close. But that's okay. Yeah.
Is there astral travel, for example, with the South African tradition?
Oh yeah, it's universal stuff. Yeah, it's all, they just has different names to it. It's universal stuff. Yeah. Any other questions? Great, well we're over time, so anybody who wants to leave can leave. Anybody who wants to stay for the meditation can stay. And those that are leaving, thanks for coming. No. Okay, so just sit up straight again for the last bit, and take some deep breaths, center yourself, and follow the breath, close your eyes, relax everything, and then just meditate or take anything you want from the talk that you want to focus on, or imagine and put it into the field in an unattached way.
Whatever trouble comes your way, hold on fast and always stay. There's too much shadow pass. Always pray and always ask. You do not bend, rejecting balance not inside. Hold on fast, enjoy the ride. If the shadows grows your fun, turn your face into the sun. You do not bend. Find something that brings you joy. This will overcome their ploy. They might try and tempt with lust. Let it go and always trust. You do not bend. Your shadow tells you where's the right. Acknowledge that and do not fight. It may be hard to just say no, to find the truth and just go slow. You do not bend. You'll know him by the fruits he brings and the sound of the song he sings. So know I can't tell I love you, dear. You surely stay far and dear. His tricks now there you can see, but the onus is on you to be free. You cannot say it's not your sin, that you're not accountable. twist around. He looks like an angel and talks like an angel and glides like an angel too, but lies like the devil and trusts the truth that it makes us trust like you.
Okay, when you're ready to come back, I just have one question. Anybody notice how the music changed?
Yes.
How did you feel? Yeah, isn't it totally disturbing? And that's like you sort of listen to one thing, you only know the difference when you... It's a brilliant piece of music. This guy is an incredible guitarist. And, he was actually given a message, because there was an interlude, his uncle, who was a musician, said, now you have to play like the devil, and he did. And so music's an unbelievably powerful thing. And the thing is, you don't know what's happening to you. And the intention of rap and heavy metal can be okay. Some people relate to that, it's fine. But if the words are wrong, and the intention is wrong, and the person who's saying it and singing it is wrong, it's basically, it's dark side music. And you can see what's going on the planet now because of social media. And there's a light and dark side, but the dark seems to be prevailing, and the same thing with the music. You can sort of get the play of light and dark is very prevalent now. But don't worry about it. The only thing to fear is fear, and like I say, mostly just watch out for your tricksters. Watch your back, dot your I's, cross your T's, you'll be fine. You don't have to worry about this. But it's good to know this is the way the world works, because maybe it'll change the way you think about politics and other things. There's something else going on behind the scenes, and often the people who are the most affected by it in a bad way don't even know what's going on. That's the problem. Yeah. Well, thanks for coming.
Thank you.
All right, take care.